justice and joy. For young and for old, a place at the table, a voice to be heard, a part in the song. The hands of a child in hands that are wrinkled, for young and for old, the right to belong. And God will delight when we are creators of justice and joy, compassion and peace. Yes, God will delight when we are creators of justice, justice and joy. Joy, joy, joy. For everyone born, a place at the table, to live without fear and safely to lead, to learn to speak out to witness and worship. For everyone born, the right to be free. And God will delight when we are creators of justice and compassion and peace. Yes, God will delight when we are creators of justice and joy. 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 Justice and joy.
Good afternoon. My name is Ben and I'm an alcoholic. I'm also the pastor of Trinity Church. Welcome. We are so glad that you are here for this special event sponsored by the Interfaith Addiction and Recovery Coalition. This is a group that actually started here at this church with volunteers and leaders and has branched out into the community, and we could not be more proud of that. This group continues to host events to raise awareness around issues with addiction and recovery that, as so many of us know, tend to fly under the radar and in secrecy far too often. And so we are grateful for this opportunity to be with you, to share together in this time. It will be a very enriching time together. I just want to let you know just a little bit, just some logistics. First is a good question that you may have is, where are the restrooms? The restrooms are straight ahead, 4 doors, straight ahead. Don't veer right, don't veer left. If you come out on Jefferson Street, you walk too far. So just stay straight ahead and you'll make it there. We do ask, if at all possible, try to hold on to that. We will give you a break after our speaker is finished to use the restroom at that point. But as you can imagine, if a caravan of people are moving, then it will be very noticeable. But like we said, it is that way if you do need it, and we will give you a scheduled time to use the restroom here in just a bit. You also have a note card in your pews in the little pew pockets there. Feel free to write questions for our speaker on that note card. When we do the intermission and allow you to go to the restroom, if you do choose to get up and go, just leave your card on the pew, please, and a volunteer will get it so that our speaker can address these, or our panel, rather, I think is going to be addressing questions. And so we would like for you to do that as well. We also invite you to join us on Telfair Square after the program for fellowship, refreshments, music, and there are resource tables and representatives from our community. But this will be a really fun time that we can move from outdoors to indoors. We did pray for rain to stop, and it did for the moment. But we are grateful for that, and so it is a nice, cool day outside that we can continue to enjoy together. So we are so grateful that you are here for this event, for this time together, and we pray God's blessing upon each of you.
Good morning to all. My name is Ibrahim Abdul Malik. I serve in the capacity of Imam of Masjid Jihad here in Savannah, Georgia. I've been asked to offer a prayer, and before I offer that prayer, would you indulge me with a moment of silence? A moment of silence, and in that moment of silence, let us seek an answer to Almighty God for human suffering throughout the planet. In God's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful Redeemer, all praise is due to Almighty God, the cherisher, the sustainer, the God and the evolver of all of creation, the most merciful benefactor, the merciful Redeemer. It is you that we worship, and your aid and assistance we seek. Guide us on a path that is straight and upright, a path of those upon whom you have bestowed your grace and your favor, and not the path of those who incur your wrath, earn your own anger, or go astray. We ask, having been guided, please do not allow our hearts to swerve. Do not allow our hearts to deviate from the guidance. Grant us from your presence mercy, for you are the most bountiful, liberal giver, and you give without any measure that anyone who gives. Bless our event today. Continue to guide us. Continue to sustain us in this work. Amen.
Good afternoon. My name is Carol Pine, and I am a very grateful recovering alcoholic. I'm also the co-founder of the Interfaith Addiction and Recovery Coalition. There was a time when addiction was only whispered about. It was considered a tragic condition with no reason for hope. There was a prevailing no-talk rule, especially in houses of worship. So there was largely no help either. But times have changed, thank goodness. Doors to Hope Recovery in our community is our first community-wide event of our young nonprofit here in Savannah. Our Interfaith Addiction and Recovery Coalition has only one goal, and that is to equip faith leaders of all faiths with knowledge and support that they need so that they can help address addiction openly and honestly in their own congregations and in their families and their lives. They are also learning, with some additional help from us, that addiction is a disease, a chronic illness. It is not a moral failing. A man who has been guiding and inspiring people facing addiction with us is today with us, and his name is William Cope Moyers. I am blessed to say that William has been a friend and a colleague of mine for decades. I'd like to tell you a little something about William before he speaks with you. William is Vice President of Public Affairs and Community Relations for Hazel and Betty Ford, which is now the leading nonprofit addiction treatment program in the United States. He was a journalist at CNN in Atlanta and a rising star with CNN, but it was there that he nearly lost his life in a crack house in Atlanta. He was facing his own addiction, and it led him to write a best-selling book 17 or 18 years ago now called Broken, My Story of Addiction and Redemption. It became a New York Times bestseller, and here's the good news. Next year, there will be a sequel with a very apt title, Broken Open. William has appeared on many national media outlets, including Oprah, Larry King Live, Good Morning America, National Public Radio. He has spoken in a wide range of settings all around the United States, from Library of Congress meetings to congressional hearings to local churches like ours and Rotary clubs. So he has covered the waterfront. He is also a key figure in a brand new organization here in Georgia that we're very excited about called the Addiction Alliance of Georgia. It is a partnership between Hazel and Betty Ford and Emory Healthcare. And we will be hearing much more about the subject having to do with both treatment, education, public education, and support for recovery in the state of Georgia. William comes from St. Paul, Minnesota, which is my hometown, although Savannah is now my home. And William has been a friend and colleague for many years. And whenever I'm in his presence, he inspires me. So you can count on this today. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you all for being here today. As Carol said, I've been around a long time. I've worked for Hazel and Betty Ford for 28 years. Hard to believe. I've given thousands and thousands of talks over those 28 years, but I believe this is the first time I've ever been in Savannah to speak. So there's always a first, even for old fellow travelers like me. It's also a first for me because in all of the run-ups or all of the introductions to my public advocacy work over the decades, I don't think I've ever been graced ahead of time by the music that we had that filled our ears with the spirit of what brings us here today. That's a first. And in all of my decades of speaking, oftentimes there's been a prayer ahead of my talk. But I know this is the first time that I have ever, in all of my career, had an imam who gave that prayer. So thank you for that, because I know I'm going to be okay today. Thank you all for being here. And as Carol said, mine's been a long journey, like many of ours have. A day at a time does add up after a while. Hard to believe that it was 29 years ago and 2 days ago that this is what happened to me. The morning of October the 12th of 1994. There was a sharp rap on the door followed by a muffled but unmistakable command from a voice outside in the hallway. "We want the white guy, just the white guy. We know he's in there. He comes out now and there's no trouble for anyone later." I was the white guy, and I knew in that instant that my family's desperate search to track me down had ended at this decayed two-story apartment in a violent pocket of Atlanta's inner city. Terrified, I rushed around the room trying to warn the other crackheads to sit still and keep quiet. "Don't panic," I whispered. "They'll go away." But nobody was listening because everybody was as high and as scared as I was. We bumped into one another as we tried to find a way out, but there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. We were like wild animals trapped by a wind-whipped forest fire. Who was out there banging on the door? Was it my mother, my father, my wife? My mind flashed back to that day 4 days earlier, October the 8th of 1994, when I left my house in suburban Atlanta. I remembered kissing 4-month-old Thomas and 2-year-old Henry goodbye. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I told my wife that I needed to run some errands before dinner. Instead, I drove to the parking lot on the corner of Boulevard and Ponce de Leon Avenues, approached a drug dealer with a thick scar running from his left ear down to the corner of his mouth, and paid him $100 for 6 marble-sized rocks of crack cocaine. I held them in my hand and thought, these are going to keep me going for a day or two. But they were gone in 4 hours. Now the knocking became a relentless pounding that shook the door frame. I thought about escaping out the back porch to the vacant lot and just running. But where would I go? They would find me, just like they had found me in St. Paul and in Harlem. I've been running for 5 years, and now on the morning of October the 12th of 1994, I had run out of options. And so on that morning, 29 years ago and 2 days ago, October the 12th of 1994, what do you think I did? There I have, and Kelly, you can't guess because you know the answer to this. What do you think I did on the morning of October the 12th of 1994? There I am in a full-blown relapse of my chronic illness. Yes, there is no cure for addiction, at least not yet, but there is a solution, thankfully. Many of us living in that solution today, and we'll hear more about that a little bit later. But what did I do on the morning of October 12th of 1994 when I've been running for 5 years? I've been in crack houses in Harlem and in Atlanta and in St. Paul. They're knocking on the door asking for the white guy. I'm the white guy. And so what did I do on the morning of October 12th of 1994? I got high one more time. Yep. This is an illness that causes people who are sick with it to go in the exact opposite direction of the knocking door, isn't it? This is an illness that causes us to go in the exact opposite direction of the families and the community and the churches, the places of faith that care for us. This is an illness that causes good people to do bad things, loving people to do hurtful things, and rational people to act irrationally. And on the morning of October the 12th of 94, I've been running for 5 years. I run out of options, and so I take one more hit. And so chronic am I with the disease of addiction, and it is a chronic illness, that not even the substance is working anymore for this chronic addict and alcoholic. And so I take that hit, and as quickly as I go up, down I come. And then this is what happened to me in that last few minutes. I folded my arms over my chest, longing for comfort and for peace. I was so sick and tired of it all. And in that moment, I realized the hopelessness of my situation. And in a sudden, brief flash of clarity, I asked myself, now what? Now what? I stared at the filthy wood floor littered with half-empty beer cans, cigarette butts, and used syringes. The answer to that simple question, now what? The answer wasn't here anymore. It was all over. I was done. And so on the morning of October 12th of 1994, up off the floor of that crack house in Atlanta, Georgia, I came. And I remember coming up off the floor of that crack house just as clearly as I'm looking at the pastor here or the imam here or any of you. I was not in a cocaine-induced psychosis. I was not in an alcohol-induced blackout. I was conscious. Flattened, yes, but conscious. And then up off the floor of that crack house I came. And I walked past all those other hopeless and helpless souls in that crack house and walked over towards that door. 8 other people besides me were in that crack house, and there was nothing different between them and me except 2 things. What were those 2 things? One was the color of their skin. I spent the last 28 years at Hazelden saying that addiction does not discriminate, and neither should recovery, but it does. And the other thing that separated me from those other people in that crack house was what? This. And what was this? It was people who cared for me. They were only looking for one person that day, the white guy in the crack house. And this is what lifted me up off the floor of that crack house. And what was this? Not only the community, but what was this? What was it that lifted me up that morning? Hope. I'd been flattened. I couldn't imagine living my life with drugs any more than I could imagine living my life without drugs. I just wanted to die. But I didn't have the guts to pick up one of those mini pistols or rifles in that crack house, put it in my mouth, and find my answer that way. Came up off the floor of that crack house because I had hope. Those other people in that crack house were just as sick as I was, and they needed what I was about to get, but they weren't looking for them. And when I couldn't answer the question, now what? Now what am I going to do? I figured, you know what? My way ain't working. This is the answer. Up I came, and over I went to that door. And went past all those other people who needed and deserved what I was about to get, which was what? One more chance. Addiction is an illness of isolation. The antidote to it is community. Here we are, and we'll talk more about that later on. But on that morning of October 12th of 94, my community rallied. My family, my employer, my church, my pastor, my doctor, my neighbors, my fellow travelers, they all came together and they engineered an intervention to save me from an illness that was about to kill me. And when I opened that door, on the other side, there was the answer. 2 deputy sheriffs from the Fulton County Sheriff's Department who were there not to arrest me. What were they going to arrest me for? Possession of the narcotics in my bloodstream? The war on drugs in this country has failed for 300 years. That wasn't the answer. They were there to save me. And you know what they said to me that day? They didn't say, come with us. They said, would you like to come with us? Because we can't make us get better, can we? We can't make family members get better, can we? Any more than we can make a diabetic get better. Any more than we can make a hypertensive get better. Any more than we can make a woman with breast cancer get better. Now, we can encourage them to get better, take their insulin, take their Lipitor, go get that breast screening or that mammogram, but we can't make somebody with a chronic illness get better unless they want to be part of the solution. We can invite them to be, we can encourage them to be, but those 2 deputy sheriffs weren't going to make me get better. But when they said, would you like to come with us? And when I couldn't answer the question, now what? I went. I was saved by a community that hadn't given up on me even when I'd given up on myself. Incidentally, of the 9 people in that crack house, only one of us is alive today. Yep. Because the knock on the door was for me. In that last minute, it didn't quite go as effortlessly as perhaps it could have. Because as those 2 deputy sheriffs walked me out to that van parked in front of the crack house for me, and by the way, 2 days ago when Kelly and I were in Atlanta, I went by that crack house again just to remind myself of what it was like 29 years ago. And it's been gentrified. It's been cleaned up in the neighborhood. But that spot where that van was sitting is still there. And this is what happened to me in that last 1 minute, 29 years and 2 days ago. A hard, steady rain was falling as we approached the gray van parked at the curb. The sliding door opened and I collapsed into the back seat. My father was sitting in the front passenger seat. Turning around to look at me, he saw a 35-year-old crack addict who hadn't shaved, showered, or eaten in 4 days. A man who had walked out on his wife and 2 young baby boys and ditched his promising journalism career at CNN. A broken shell of a man. A pale shadow of the human being that he had raised to be honest, loving, and responsible, his firstborn son. "You're angry," I said. I didn't know what else to say. "That's hardly the word for it," my father replied, his voice harsh and cold like the rain outside. More silence. "There is nothing more I can do for you," my father said. "I'm finished." All these years later, my father tells me that's where the conversation ended. But whether I imagined it or not, I heard my father say something else to me that morning. He said, "I hate you." And I remember looking into my father's deepest eyes and sharing my deepest truth. I hate me too. No wonder it's so hard to get here. Because yes, it is a chronic disease, but it is a chronic disease that has an emotional dynamic to it that is unlike any other chronic disease. When a father can think in that moment that he hates his firstborn son, my father did not hate me, but he did not know what else. He did not know how else to express his fear, his anger, his frustration, and his hopelessness over me. So he said, "I hate you." And what a powerful chronic illness this is when it can cause those of us who have it to think that we hate ourselves too. I didn't hate myself, but I was so ashamed that I couldn't seem to get it. That no matter my best intentions and my 4 treatments over 5 years between 1989 and that moment, I still could not find sustainable recovery. I was filled with shame, and when we're filled with shame, we tend to go in the opposite direction of the knocking door, and we tend to be people who loathe ourselves. So it's hard to get here. And I had nothing to do with naming what this day is all about, but this day is about doors of hope, and this whole event is about creating and keeping that door of hope open, like it was for me on the morning of October the 12th of 1994. And I'll come back to that when we get ready to close. But let me just tell you where the dynamic that my father and I felt, where he said, "I hate you and I hate me too," comes from. Because you know what? As Carol talked about in the beginning, there's a terrible stigma around this illness. It still exists in Savannah, in case you're wondering. It still exists in St. Paul and in Austin, Texas, and in Miami and in Atlanta. This place should be filled with us because we fill up these communities. But there's still shame and stigma, and I don't want to go be seen with all those other people over there. And that shame and that stigma is as potent in public as it is in our families. The shame and the stigma around addiction exists in part because we don't look like those people, do we? We clean up pretty well when we find recovery. But for the most part, we're pretty good people, aren't we? And certainly, I'm a prime example of the fact that addiction does not discriminate. I lacked for nothing growing up. I don't come from a broken home. My parents are still living at age 90 and 89 and have been married for 68 years. I don't come from a broken home. And my parents raised me with everything. Emotionally, I was a pretty well-rounded fellow. I had issues as a teenager. All teenagers have issues, but I was a pretty decent fellow. Emotionally, morally, I knew the difference between right and wrong and good and bad and love and hate. I have good morals. Financially, I always had money in my pocket. I never lacked for $1 or $10 or an education. In fact, when I graduated from college from Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia in 1981, they had no student loans. So financially, morally, emotionally, I had it all. And I never lacked for anything spiritually either. My father, long retired, and younger people in here would not know him, but some of the older timers in here, I'm not looking at anybody specifically, would know, my father's the journalist Bill Moyers. And my father won 40 or 50 Emmys, 2 or 3 Pulitzer Prizes, had a distinguished 50-year career in television. Many people know my father, the journalist, Bill Moyers. And my mother, by the way, who was the executive producer and co-founder of the television production company that they founded. Very, very, very successful. Most people don't know, or some people would know, that before my father was a journalist, my father was President Lyndon Johnson's chief of staff and press secretary in the White House in the 1960s. And so I remember trips on Air Force One and Easter egg hunts on the south lawn of the White House and weekends at Camp David. A few would know that before my father was Lyndon Johnson's chief of staff, my father helped to set up the Peace Corps under President Kennedy in 1961. But what only a few people, maybe Drew Brooks being one of them over here, and Drew, thanks for your good work through Faith Partners. What a few of the old timers, or those who were grounded in faith, would know is that before my father was all of those things, my father was an ordained Southern Baptist minister. When I was born in 1959 in Fort Worth, Texas, my father was in seminary, and he and my mother, who played the organ in a small church they pastored in Central Texas. You know why I tell you that? Because I grew up with a fundamental understanding of a power greater than myself. Oh, I struggled with my faith from time to time. We all do. And there's a chapter in my first book called The Death of Faith. It's what happened when I witnessed a family standing underneath a tree that got struck and killed by lightning in 1971. And I could not rectify that this family standing under one of 10 million trees in a national forest could be standing underneath the one that got struck by lightning and it killed them. And I wrangled for many years with what my faith was, but I did always believe. How could I not? I was raised that way. So I had it all, right? You don't have to come from a broken home. You don't have to lack morals. You don't have to be broke. You can have it all, and you can still develop this chronic illness. Why? Well, for me, I've got 2 other things that are going on during all those years that I'm being raised in a good family that loved me and loves me unconditionally. What are those 2 things? One of them is this. What is this? It's a brain that's just genetically vulnerable to substances. Darn it. I know a lot of you have that same brain. We didn't ask for it, but we got it. And it's not our fault, but it is our responsibility to learn how to manage the fact that we have a brain that's vulnerable to substances. 1 in 10 of us in Savannah, 1 in 10 of us in Georgia, 1 in 10 of us in wherever you come from, 1 in 10, maybe 2 in 10 of us have a brain that's just vulnerable to substances. And I have one of those. I also have something else, and I have what everybody in here shares, whether you have a vulnerable brain or not. And what I have also is what we as human beings share, and it's this. And you know what this is? It's a hole in the soul. A hole, H-O-L-E, in the soul, S-O-U-L. A hole in the soul. And you know, we all have it as human beings. It's called yearning. It's why we want to be pastors of churches or imams. It's why we want to go to the moon or run a race. It's why we want to study art or we want to cure cancer. There's nothing wrong with yearning. All human beings yearn. It's why we're the creative species we are. I think it's the only species of animals that does yearn is because we have this yearning. But some of us yearn for something that is impossible to attain. And you know what that is? Perfectionism. And yet that's what I wanted. From the time I have a conscious memory, I never felt good enough. I always wanted to be better than. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous describes people like me this way: restless, irritable, and discontent in my own skin. I always itched with a sense that I wasn't good enough or I needed to be better than. And some would say, well, William, that's because your father was on the cover of Time and Newsweek magazine the same week in 1965. Maybe. Or that, William, your parents are very successful, so you just wanted to be successful like them. Well, maybe, but that's not why I have a hole in the soul. I have a hole in the soul because I never felt good enough, no matter what the external circumstance was. And that's how I lived my life, restless, irritable, and discontent until I was 15 years old. And when I was 15 years old, I smoked marijuana for the first time. And when I smoked marijuana for the first time, I found the answer to this thing, and I wasn't even looking for it. I smoked marijuana, and by the way, the marijuana of my generation is nothing like the marijuana of today for two reasons. One, today's marijuana is 30 to 40 to 50 times more potent, and you don't have to smoke it. And two, it's legal in a lot of states. And that might be just fine, unless you got this and you got this. When I smoked marijuana for the first time, nobody made me smoke it. I smoked it because, well, that's what teenagers did, I thought. And I smoked marijuana. And when I did, well, you remember where you were and you had your first drink or your first drug. When I smoked marijuana for the first time, it took care of this thing. I didn't have to try so hard in life anymore. I loved it. The only problem with it was that when I smoked marijuana for the first time, it took care of this, and it turned this on. When I smoked marijuana, it went right to this genetically vulnerable brain, and the rest is history, right? I could not turn this off of my own free will. I developed a baffling inability to just say no. Does not excuse what would happen to me over the next 15 years, but it sure helps to explain it. Smoking marijuana at 15, living in a crack house in Harlem, New York at age 30, at 125th or 123rd and Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard. I was somewhere up there. Marijuana at 15 in quiet suburbs of Long Island, living in a crack house in Harlem, New York, 15 years later. Yep, I got the disease. And when I went, and over the course, and I don't ever tell my using story because our using stories are all the same, right? That's why we're here. We got this, we got this, we do this, we do this, we do this, and if we're fortunate, there's a knock at the door for us. However that knock on the door comes. For some of us, it comes through an organization like Faith Partners. For some, it comes through this alliance that you've developed here. For some of us, it comes through 12 steps. For many of us, it comes through treatment. For a lot of us, it comes through treatment more than once. And I had to go to treatment 4 times over 5 years, between 1989 and 1994, before I had the knock at the door and I got one more chance. I couldn't answer the question, now what? My father said he hated me. I said I hated me too, and I surrendered. Surrender does not mean giving up. It takes great courage to surrender. So says a military strategist. It takes great courage to surrender. It's easy to give up or take an overdose, but it's hard to give in. Because to give in is not to check out. To give in is to check in to a power greater than yourself, a program of recovery, whatever you call it, and a community of we like this one. It also requires one more thing. When I finally surrendered on the morning of October the 12th of 1994, I had to realize in that moment that for me, for this chronic addict and alcoholic, it wasn't about believing in God anymore. I believed in God, and it still didn't keep me sober. For this chronic alcoholic, I had to stop believing in God, and I had to start trusting in God. Trusting that God could do for me what I could not do for myself. It might seem subtle to some, but for a lot of us, it's a big leap. And part of that, going from believing in God to trusting in God, can be summed up this way. Faith without works is dead. Whatever your program of recovery, you got to work it. I mean, there is a saying in 12-step recovery, it works if you work it, but you got to work it. Well, you know what? I had to pocket my belief in God. I had to trust in God. I had to trust that God could do for me what I couldn't do for myself, but that my God was not going to say, you're healed, or it's all over now, William, you're fine. No, my God was going to say, you know what, Moyers, you're going to park your ego over there, and you're going to start to work this program of treatment that these professional counselors tell you to work. It's why they're professionals. If it was as easy as laying hands on, then we wouldn't have a treatment need in this country. People would just lay their hands on rabbis and pastors and imams, and others would lay their hands on us and we would be healed. It's not about that. Because you know what? There is no cure for addiction, as we said. Not yet. But there is a solution. And I've been living in that solution since the morning of October the 12th of 1994. Carol, how much more time do I have? Who knows how much more time do I have? 1:40. Perfect. I've got 10 more minutes, and then we're going to have a really good panel. And they lived happily ever after, didn't they? If you read this book, Broken, which, as Carol said, I wrote this book 17 years ago. It's still in print. Amazing. You would define, or I would define my recovery this way. V-shaped. Down he went, and up he goes, right? And if you read this book to the very end, I had a V-shaped recovery. For the first, I found recovery in Atlanta in October of 1994, and I wrote this in 2005, 2006. So 11 years after I came out of that crack house, I had a V-shaped recovery. It was wonderful. Down he went, and up he goes. And then, what do they say about it? Stuff happens. Stuff happens, or life on life's terms. And in 2008, I hit bottom again. Only it was different this time. I hit bottom stone cold sober. You know how hard that is? You know why it's so painful? Because we feel it. When I hit bottom in the crack house in Harlem, or the crack house in St. Paul, or the bar in the crack house in Atlanta, Georgia, I didn't really feel it because I was under the influence. But in 2008, I hit bottom stone cold sober. And the bottom that I hit was a bottom about the realization that my alcoholism is one kind of ism I have, but I've got other isms. I've got my workaholism, I've got my relationshipism, I've got my perfectionism, and I've got an ism, all of those isms grounded in the grand poopah of all isms, and that's my codependencyism. Ooh. And that was a painful bottom. And all of a sudden, I was a double winner. Yep. And when I walked into my first Al-Anon meeting in 2008, I was scared to death because I had found it easy to let go of substances finally. I did that. What was hard for me was to let go of other people, particularly those that I love. And particularly those who I could swear would just get better if they would listen to what I was telling them to do. And I walked into my first Al-Anon meeting, and it scared me to death because letting go of other people is the hardest thing in the whole world. And what I discovered in that first Al-Anon meeting was that 2/3 of the men that were in that room, I knew them from AA. And that was a painful bottom for me in 2008. Thank goodness for the power of we ×2. And he lived happily ever after, right? No. Part of my new memoir, which Carol said will be out next year, is grounded in a reality that there is more to sobriety than abstinence for me, and there is more to recovery than sobriety. Now, we all define that differently. But I have come to learn that because in 2013, 2014, I had dental surgery. Now, I'm not just any typical dental patient. I'm a public advocate for Hazelland. Everybody knows what I do. I stand up and speak out in churches in Savannah and Congress and on Oprah and at the Chamber of Commerce, and wherever you'll invite me, I'll be there. So I couldn't really sort of pretend that I wasn't what I was. Everybody knew that, including the 2 doctors that prescribed me pain medication and said, "Be careful, William." Okay. I'd never taken opiates. I shot heroin one time in 1990. I promptly threw up and passed out, and that was the end of that opiate experience. And I didn't like opiates, and all of a sudden I'm taking pain meds for this neuralgia that I've developed in my jaw, and one night, well, I like them. But one night, I liked them so much I took what I call in this book +1. Just a +1. You know, I got decades of sobriety. I worked for Hazel and Betty Ford. I don't like opiates, and I'll take a +1 because it hurts, and I got nothing to do tomorrow. Cunning, baffling, powerful, and patient. It waits. It waits for those high highs or those low lows. It waits for back surgery. It waits for whatever. Cunning, baffling, powerful, and patient. And the next thing you know, I can't get off the darn things. I got decades of recovery. I trust in my higher power. I'm a public advocate. And I cannot get off of those pain meds of my own free will. No wonder there's an opiate epidemic in this country, and no wonder it's been killing people as long as it has been. Because a drug is a drug is a drug, and opiates aren't. They're very different for this guy and for some others in this room. When I finally righted the ship, 2 things were required to do it. One is I had to draw down on my IRA. We all know what an IRA is, right? We save in our IRA for the day when we're going to retire. We never save in our IRAs thinking that we're not going to draw down on them one day, right? We save in our IRAs because we know we're going to draw down on the $10 or $100,000 we put in there. Well, guess what? A lot of us have what I have, which is an IRA, the individual recovery account. And I've been putting into that account, well, since a long time. I've been investing in my IRA. Never could I have imagined I'd draw down on it like I did. And guess what? In 2013, 14, and 15, I drew down on that sucker. Because I could not stop these pain meds of my own free will, even while I was still suffering from the chronic illness, chronic pain, legitimate chronic pain. And if I hadn't invested as much in my IRA, and you all know how to invest in an IRA, it's called giving it away. Giving it away, you get it back. And when you get it back, you put it in the IRA. And then one day you might just draw down on it. Cunning, baffling, powerful, patient, you're likely to draw down on it. And so I had a very well-invested IRA. But even that IRA wasn't quite enough. Decades of recovery. I'm the public advocate for Hazel and Betty Ford. I work in the field, not a clinician, but I still work in the field. I got a really good IRA, and I still cannot get off of those darn things. And I don't like myself under the effect and influence of pain meds. Even though I'm still looking good and functioning on the outside, I don't like what's going on inside. Because it kind of brings back what? The way I used to be. And so I had to trust, not just in my IRA, trust not just in my God. I had to trust in science and medicine. I had to take Suboxone, an anti-craving medication for those who don't know it. And I know there's a lot of debate in the recovery community about the use of anti-craving medications. And I'm not going to get into that debate because it's not worth it. But I'm here to tell you, thank goodness that science came up with an anti-craving medication for this craving opiate brain. Because all those other things were not enough to get me to stop wanting opiates. And when I took that Suboxone in February of 2016, all of a sudden, things got back to normal. I didn't want them anymore. Put a little film under my tongue, and off we go with the rest of life. And for a long time, it was hard for me to share that because of the judgments, the stigma that exists in the recovery community, particularly the 12-step community. And yet, I know there's probably people in the sanctuary today that are saying, you know, William, if you really put your mind to it, no pun intended, you could have gotten off those opiates by yourself. Nope. I needed a medication, and I'm here to tell you that it works. Thank goodness that our higher power put scientists and doctors on the earth to create such things. And by the way, I got a lot of criticism from my 12-step community in St. Paul when I revealed that I had used Suboxone to get off of pain meds. And a lot of those people who were criticizing me were going out after the 12-step meeting and lighting up a cigarette. Bill Wilson maintained his years in sobriety by smoking himself to death. My mentor in recovery in St. Paul, who's been in recovery for 55 years, can't stop smoking, can't stop dipping nicotine. And I'm not going to equate Suboxone with nicotine, but I'm going to say people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. There are many pathways to recovery. We're living it a day at a time. To get the rest of that story, you'll have to read the book next year when I come back. But I want to close. And by the way, so there was the V-shaped recovery. Then there was the V-shaped recovery that went like, hit the bottom in 08, and then up I came, and then I struggled with pain meds. And basically, this is what I think of as recovery today. And I'm sure at age 64 that I will be encountering all kinds of other things that happen as we get older. Thank goodness we have a program which really only emphasizes the substance. Some of us have the program that emphasizes the substance only once in the 12 steps. The word alcohol is only mentioned once. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, Percocet, weed, nicotine, whatever it is. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Our lives have become unmanageable. There's no other reference to the substance that gets us there until you get to the 12th step where it talks about working with other alcoholics and addicts. Why is that? Because those of us like me don't have a problem with substances. We have a problem living life without substances. Yeah, that's those 12 steps, which I still believe in and still rely on, are there to help me manage through stuff. And so as I get older, I'm sure that this program will become quite handy in ways I could never have imagined. Even as I go like this. So let's close by, let me tell you this. Long time ago, I used to give speeches and people would be like, oh, that's really inspiring, but I never gave, but they were waiting for more. And so I learned a long time ago that I need to empower you all. I'm going to get on an airplane and go back to the Twin Cities tomorrow, and you're going to still be here. And here it is, a Saturday afternoon, and you all came out for this. You know what that tells me? You care. And caring is important, but action is more important. And so here's what I want you to do. Number one, if you are a person in recovery, however you define recovery, if you're a person in recovery, we invite you to leave this gathering today, and sometime between now and we'll give you until Monday, we want you to share the fact that you're a person in recovery with somebody who does not know it. It might be at the grocery store, it might be at the synagogue, it might be at the church tomorrow, it might be at a book club, whatever it is. Share with somebody who doesn't know it that you're a person in recovery. 2, if you're a family member, share with somebody who doesn't know it between now and we'll give you till Tuesday. Share with somebody who doesn't know it that you're the family member of somebody who has struggled with addiction and hopefully found recovery. And I know there are people, is Leslie here? Where's Leslie? Leslie, can I talk about you for a second? Leslie, thank you for sharing last night. I know there are a lot of parents like you, Leslie, who can't talk about recovery in a loved one because that loved one has died. But here you are. Here you are, 15 years after your own loss or whatever it is, caring enough to give back. So if you're a family member like Leslie who's lost a loved one to this illness, talk about that. Thank you, Leslie. If you're a professional who works in this field, and do we have any counselors here today or anybody who works? Yay. Okay. Start to talk about your successes. Sir, you don't do what you do for all that money they pay you. And neither do you. You do what you do, and you do what you do, and you do what you do because you know you make a difference. And yet the stigma of this illness is such that they never see us when we get better because we go back to looking pretty good. We behave. We stay out of jail. We stay out from underneath bridges. We are not the problem anymore. And so how can we expect everybody on the outside of these walls to appreciate what brings us here today? So start to talk about your successes if you're a professional who works in the field because you know you make a difference. And by the way, if you are clergy, if you're a leader of faith in your house of hope, whatever that is, talk about why you bring programs like Faith Partners. Drew, raise your hand. Drew's program. Why you bring Faith Partners into your congregants, because you know it makes a difference, because you know that addiction doesn't discriminate whether you're a Muslim, a Jew, a Christian, or you don't believe. You know this illness doesn't discriminate, and neither should recovery. And so if you're anywhere in this milieu of being interested in this subject, start to talk about why you came here today, why it matters. Every one of you has a story. Every one of you has a story. It might be a story that's only got 30 days to it or 30 years. It might be a story that is a faith-based program, or it might be a medication-assisted therapy that works for you. Whatever your story, whether you've lost a loved one or whether you've got a household full of recovering people, share that. Share that. Because, you know, here we are. But think of all the people who aren't here, who could use what we know and what we live and what we learn. And that brings me to my closing remark. And I'm sorry I've gone a couple of minutes over. By the way, Kelly, can you just raise your hand? My friend Kelly Geiser over here. Kelly has worked at Hazel and Betty Ford longer than I have. Thank you, Kelly. And Kelly almost single-handedly raised the $10 million that was necessary to start the Addiction Alliance of Georgia, which is one of our sponsors here today. The Addiction Alliance of Georgia, which has a small treatment program at Emory University in Atlanta, but is doing community-based groupings. Here we are. So, Kelly, thank you for all you've done to raise money. Kelly doesn't even live in Georgia. Thank you for what you've done to raise this $10 million, including a very exciting one that might be right around the corner with a popular restaurant chain. Shh, can't announce it yet, but Kelly, thank you. And Kelly's got some information about the Addiction Alliance of Georgia. It'll be out here, okay? But at the end of the day, so get to know the AAG and get to know the other sponsors of our group today. At the end of the day, I want to leave you with this. One more minute. We're here to celebrate recovery. But we're here to open doors for those who aren't here to celebrate recovery. And how do you do it? Well, let me read you the epigraph of my first book, Broken. And I think this will resonate with you. A disciple asks the Rebbe, why does Torah tell us to place these words upon your hearts? Why does Torah not tell us to place these holy words in our hearts? The Rebbe answers, well, it is because as we are, our hearts are closed. And we cannot place the holy words in our hearts. So we place those holy words on top of our hearts. And there those holy words stay until one day the heart breaks and the words fall in. Every one of you has holy words of experience. You would not be here today, whatever your role, you would not be here if not for your holy words of experience. So take what brought you here and go back out and place those words as you say them, as you live them, as you define them. Take those holy words and place them on the hearts of those who are not here. One day, the hearts of those people who are still suffering and are not here today, one day, you know what? Their hearts may break and your words will fall in. Thank you very much.
We are so grateful for those words. We're going to take a brief intermission now. Now listen, I know my historic pews are so comfortable to sit on, but we invite you to take a break from that, to stand up, to stretch your legs. You can come back to that comfortable seat momentarily. Bathrooms are down the hall. I do want to invite you to go ahead and put your note card if you have questions for our panel. Leave them in your pew if you do get up. I also want to take just a brief moment to welcome a special guest who I saw slip in, Mayor Van Johnson. A friend of this church and of this community. We're grateful to see you here. Wanted to be sure that we welcomed you, Mr. Mayor, in this time, and we invite you now to take just a 5-minute break.
try my best. Testing. We're going to invite everyone to take a seat as we're going to begin in just a minute. I'm going to invite all of the panelists to come on up. So we're just missing Evelyn Wilson. Thank you for coming up, Evelyn.
And thank you. I was at your synagogue for Passover.
Oh, that's really, I knew it, but thank you again.
You did a marvelous
Oh, thank you. I'm going to have you sit right in the middle. Oh, maybe actually, Ben, you know, probably be better. Yes, okay. Hold this for a second. All right. Welcome, everybody. We want to thank you for coming here today. What a powerful speech. I know we all thought what an incredible speaker. I think I was listening to him and I realized that, you know, I've tried marijuana and I've had alcohol and I had dental surgery and had the opiates and I've smoked a cigarette, obviously. And next day I didn't crave any of them. But everything else he said I have. The only difference between him and me is the fact that I don't have that 1%, the 10% or 20% in here. It's really quite amazing that I got the lottery on that when I have all the other things he said, and I really could have done that. So before I begin and have the panel, I was asked to speak on behalf of Senator Ossoff, who sent a letter. They were going to send somebody to represent him, but at the last second they couldn't make it, so they gave me this letter. Thank you for coming together to address substance abuse. This gathering is a testament to your dedication and the bonds of your community, and I'm glad you're able to join together in collaboration. The opioid crisis continues to take a devastating toll on families and communities across the state of Georgia. Like so many of you, I've lost friends to opiate addiction and overdose. That's why last year I passed bipartisan legislation into law with my Republican colleague from Iowa, Senator Chuck Grassley, to prevent opiate abuse and opiate addiction with a focus on rural communities, helping those struggling with addiction access recovery programs. Just this month, I announced a new $7 million federal grant to the state of Georgia to strengthen local programs across the state aimed at prevention and harm reduction, recovery support, and criminal intervention and diversion. Time to get those applications underway for that, just in case you're wondering. While I regret that I could not be there with you today, I'm dedicated to ensuring that Georgians with substance use disorder have access to the resources that they deserve. Know that your efforts are in my thoughts, and I'm appreciative of the work you do for all the people of Georgia. Sincerely, Senator John Ossoff. So I want to thank him for doing that. We're going to begin the panel now, and we're so lucky here to be with really 4 wonderful people who've devoted their time to coming here. So we're going to invite them first to give a few seconds or a minute and a half biography, and then we'll start talking a little bit about the talk we had, and then we're going to invite all of your questions to be asked. So I'm going to begin here with Kevin Kelly, the interim rector for the Collegiate Church of the St. Paul's the Apostle Savannah, or St. Paul's Episcopal Church.
Thanks, Robert. I'm an alcoholic. My name is Kevin.
Hi, Kev.
I don't know most of the people in the room, so I just did what you asked me to do. Have told people who don't know me that I'm in recovery. I've been ordained in the Episcopal Church for almost 30 years and have been in recovery for 11 of them. I got sober in church on a Sunday morning. I know, right? I'm happy to be here. I've spoken at a couple of these with the coalition. It's always good to have these gatherings. I still will walk into meetings, so I don't go to meetings dressed like this. I had stuff at church this morning. But every once in a while, like, I don't get a chance to go home and change, and so I go to the meetings in drag, and people look at me, and I still have people say, I didn't know this could happen to clergy. And I'm like, really? Because in any gathering, I'm just another drunk in the room. And that's all I am here. But having been on the receiving end of the judgment and the shame, when it came out that I was an alcoholic. I want to do anything that I can always to be clear that if we're ever going to do something about the stigma and the shame, it falls to those of us who are safe to be out in recovery to do so. And so I do that whenever I can. I'm not embarrassed to be an alcoholic. I'm actually very grateful for it. So thank you all for being here. That's all for me.
I'll invite you to pass it to Pasha.
Hi, I'm Pasha. I'm an adult child. I am a member of Adult Children of Alcoholics, who are people that have grown up in families with addiction, but there does not need to be addiction in the home necessarily. It might be dysfunction. Often, in a case like that, it means the parents are, one or more of the parents are an adult child. So I have been very involved in Adult Children of Alcoholics. I want to acknowledge my sister travelers here today, Allison and Gummy. Thanks for joining. So glad to have you here. I am ordained in a retired pastor in another faith tradition Reformed church in America. I lived in upstate New York for 21 years. I'm here because I couldn't stand the weather, like so many other people, but I realized it's a trade-off because where I lived, it was winter for 6 months, and here it's summer for 6 months. The only difference is the better here is I don't have to shovel snow. So there was no Adult Children of Alcoholics group in Savannah. When I came to Savannah, there had been, actually, I think 2 different times there had been ACA. They were called, at that time, ACOA groups. I had been a member of Al-Anon for probably about 15 years, but found I needed the focus of ACA more than Al-Anon. I said at dinner last night, I think probably about 90% of people in Al-Anon and in AA can use Adult Children of Alcoholics because often it goes back to your childhood. There are 14 traits in an adult child, and one of them is we either, when we grow up, we either become alcoholics, marry alcoholics, or both. So there is definitely a use for adult children of alcoholics. So I want to invite anyone who's in a 12-step program to check it out. I would be happy to talk to you about it after. Thank you.
And thank you for being at Connection Church, which we know does so much for, she's a reverend there, and they do so much for our community. So thank you. So I'm going to invite Evelyn Wilson now to say a little bit about herself.
My name is Evelyn, and I'm an alcoholic. And I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous for 51 years. I'm 83 years young, and and I worked at Coastal State Prison for 10 years. I got that job when I was 70, and I retired when I was 80. And I worked on and off at Chatham County Jail in between, but since I retired from Coastal, I picked up some more hours at Chatham County Jail. So I'm now at Chatham County Jail. And I was sharing with Bill, I'm from Harlem, New York, and at the time that the Kennedy kid came on 116th, when he was found on 116th Street, we said if we had only known he was a Kennedy. Nobody knew he was a Kennedy. We could have kidnapped him. We could have did this. We could have did that. But we didn't know he was a Kennedy, you know. Alcoholism knows no race, no color, no social status. Anybody from the Park Avenue to the park bench can be an alcoholic. So today I share my story, I share my life with anyone, anywhere, anyhow. I say that to say that I work at Chatham County Jail, and I'm not going to take up too much time, but I speak with participants and inmates who really don't know that they are willing to give up the most precious commodity they will ever own in life, and that's their freedom for a drink or a drug. So that's how powerful substance abuse is. And I help to make them aware of that in any way I can. Thank you very much for having me.
Invite Tim Arpin.
Hey, my name's Tim, and I'm an addict. I'm addicted to alcohol. I'm addicted to drugs. I'm addicted to other people. Process addictions that get me out of myself and out of present time reality. My biggest problem, I think, with all that is I have expectations. I am entitled. I'm entitled to view things a certain way. I need life to be a certain way. I crave for things to be different. I crave for things to be the same. And when they don't, and I feel uncomfortable, I try to escape that feeling. And I use drugs or alcohol to do that. And all it's done is complete me running from pleasure, or running to pleasure, or running from pain. And it had taken wreckage with my life and ruined relationships and my self-esteem. I related so much to what he shared earlier. It could have been my story. Today, I do Al-Anon. I do a thing called Dharma Recovery, which uses Buddhist practices and principles to deal with addiction. And I'm a member of AA. I think there's many pathways to recovery, and there's not one set and find out what works for you. I know that when I let people be as they are and not as I expect them to be, the more my expectations don't match my reality, the more I suffer. And no one makes me suffer but me. So instead of me trying to change the world and everyone around me, I try to change myself today, and that's through working these programs. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to invite you to keep the mic. For the first few minutes of each person's talk, I'm going to invite each of you to talk a little bit about the speech we just heard. And you already began a little related to yourself, and I know it was long and it was really wonderfully given, but what are some things you took from it?
Definitely what things I took from it, it related to me so much. I had a very loving family. I had every opportunity growing up, but I also in turn didn't have any consequences for those mistakes. My parents took care of problems when I did make mistakes, and they covered it up either by fixing it with money, or I didn't have consequences for my actions. And so today with like loved ones, and what I've learned from Al-Anon is you gotta allow people to be as they are and not try to control them and not try to fix their problems and having those mistakes. And I guess my question to him, or?
No, just what did you think about what he said?
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
What did you take from it personally?
Just personally, addiction knows no boundaries. It knows no race, creed, religion. You can have everything. I was given every opportunity in my life, my childhood, and I have that little part of my brain. My family, I have 4 brothers. Everyone has addiction issues, whether they're in a program or not in a program. My father was an alcoholic for 50, he was sober for 50 years, but he was a dry drunk and he didn't work on any of those other isms. So his story just related completely to mine, and yeah, I'm very blessed.
And I think you brought up a pretty interesting and important aspect. I mean, we heard it was 10, 20%, but in some families, if there's a genetic disposition,
yes,
it can affect everyone, and that is a really traumatic.
Yes, my mother, growing up, she'd always say you have a genetic predisposition to alcohol at 14, and I had no idea what that meant, and I had no idea what that meant. You know, we didn't go to meetings, and I just never saw my dad drunk, but he was irritable, restless, and a workaholic, and all those other isms. And so, I was the same way. We reject the traumatic things and we copy everything else. And I copied those same patterns and pathways. And I had righteous indignation, and I needed things to be a certain way for me to be happy, and they never were. And then they were, and I still wasn't happy. So I just shifted that goalpost over into something else and something else. And I needed that to be happiness. And today I realize, happiness is just being present in the moment. In the past we can't change it and the future doesn't exist. So I try to stay in the present and find joy in my family, joy in my friends. That's where real happiness comes from for me. So I appreciate it.
And I think that's beautifully said. In Judaism, happiness is different than pleasure. Pleasure is enjoyment for the moment. Happiness is being connected, part of your family, part of your community. And so I think that's an excellent, this is all about pleasure, whereas we're all seeking happiness. And it's also ironic as we see the beer things go by the window, and we're doing this today. And the band is here to cheer Tim, by the way, if you didn't know. So good timing, guys, excellent.
Yes.
I'll pass it on to Evelyn.
Well, I was born and raised in Harlem, born in Harlem Hospital. My parents are from Georgetown, South Carolina. My father, no one ever saw him smoke a cigarette or take a drink in his life. Nobody knew why he never drank. Nobody knew why he never smoked cigarettes, but he never drank or smoked. My mother, maybe once a year, twice a year, Christmas, Thanksgiving. How did I turn out to be the biggest alcoholic and cocaine addict in Harlem? What happened is pretty much like what Bill said. I could identify with it. I took a drink and a sniff of cocaine and fell in love. If anybody in the audience have ever been in love, we all know what it feels like to be in love. I fell in love. I didn't know a human being could feel that good. I was not abused. I'm an only child. I don't have any brothers or sisters. I was given everything I ever wanted. We weren't rich or even affluent, but I never wanted for anything. Everything I ever wanted in life, all I had to do was say, I want, and my mother and father gave it to me, primarily because there were no other kids to give it to. And they loved me. Not only did they tell me, they hugged me, they kissed me, they loved on me. But when they passed away, and I'm not going to go into my story, I lived with the first cousin. See, in those days, in 58, 57, my family didn't know anything about child welfare. If somebody in the family died, you just went to live with another cousin or another aunt. You ate out the same pot, you slept in the same bed. That cousin drank. I stole her liquor and fell in love. I didn't know I could feel that good. From the top of my head to the tip of my toes. And I said secretly at the age of 12, I am going to do this every chance I get. Every chance I get. And I never told nobody. I stole liquor and felt good in the 8th grade, stole liquor and felt good in the 9th grade, and just kept on. And it made me feel good until it stopped. It works until it stops working. And at some point for an alcoholic or an addict, it stops. And then what do? What do you do when it stops? You got to keep the party going. And so I did any and everything except commit murder to keep the party going. And so I joined Alcoholics Anonymous in 1972, and I've been coming ever since. I've gotten a God of my understanding. I have been programmed that anything that makes me feel good is not good for me. I've been programmed that way. So whether it's a man, whether it's money, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, if it's going to make me feel better than reality, I stay away from it. I have not had anything to drink, drug, smoke, or shoot today, and I feel wonderful. And I want to keep that feeling going. So I could identify with Bill in terms of reality. Reality is sobriety for me, and sobriety is reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And as you pass the mic, I think it brings up an excellent point about education. You know, it used to be we got to get the education in the high schools. But now we realize the junior highs, or what they call middle schools today, may be too late. I mean, if, you know, kids are learning about this, testing all this so early on, and you were very young, you were only 12 years old, so that would be, what, 6th or 7th grade today, and some people are testing earlier, so education and earlier is one of the things that I think is important.
I was mesmerized by William speaking. What stood out for me the most was his sharing of his pedigree, and that it was almost like there was a built-in immunization. But that didn't matter. All that he had in the plus column was nullified by here and by here. And so I was just mesmerized with, you know, this man who had it all, who had everything going for him, and here brought you down. It was very, very powerful. I thank you for it.
So the thing that always catches me in meetings or today is how different the details of our stories can be, and yet right away, it's my story, right? Like, I never tried crack. I've never shot. I drank. I loved it. And it worked, so why do something that was illegal, right, when alcohol would do the job? So the circumstances of me getting sober are radically different. But as William was telling the story, he had me at the knock on the door. And what happened, I told y'all I got sober in church. Well, then I had to drive home and tell my family, because they had come to the earlier service and I was still at church. So nobody came knocking on the door. I had to walk through the door of my house to tell my wife and my kids, here's what I've figured out about myself. And our oldest was 13 and Sam was 10 at the time, and our youngest, Kate, was 7. And I got to the kitchen door and I was scared to death, and I pushed the door open, and Sam was playing on our Wii, like in the game room, right to the right. He's jumping up and down, just bouncing on his feet. And Kate and my wife, they're sitting right around the little corner in the kitchen, at the kitchen table, and Kate sees me and her face lights up and she says, "Daddy!" And I realized that I have walked into this moment of just perfect, innocent joy and feeling like I'm about to ruin it all by telling them the truth. And it was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. And there was a minute when I thought, I can't do it. I can't shatter this moment for my family. And I don't know if God ever talks to y'all. I would tell you he never talked to me. But the only time in my life I've ever heard a voice in my head was at that moment. And what it said was, "Don't chicken out." And so I took a deep breath and got my wife and said, "We need to go to the bedroom. I got to tell you something." And told her, and then that sort of started the roller coaster. Started the journey that has led to today and to tomorrow and to however many days are left. And it has been an experience of learning, not just, as we say in the program, that God could do for me what I could not do for myself, but as you said, being able to trust that God would do for me. which may sound strange for somebody whose job is to tell people that it's okay to believe in God. But that's it. That was where I was, and I still struggle with that. I get the analogy backwards. We believe that we are made in God's image, and I forget that. I get it wrong and start to think that God is made in my image, and because I'm forgetful, and because I will let people down, I'll think that the same is true about that. And it really comes down to a matter of trust. And my mother was a church organist. I was nearly born on the organ bench of First Presbyterian Church in Valdosta. I have been a believer in God since before I've never not known or believed in God. And still it's an issue. It's the way we're wired. This disease does terrible things to us. It whispers a lie into our ears all the time that is so seductive and so easy to believe. And the only way that I can keep that voice at bay is by staying connected to other people who have this same story, who have learned the same thing that I have learned about what God can do for us and about what God will do for us over and over again. So, thank you for that. While they're talking, let me tell you, when I first moved to Savannah, since I got the microphone, I was a year and a half sober. My family was still in Baton Rouge waiting for the school year to finish. And so I was looking for meetings anywhere and everywhere because I haven't been sober for very long. And meetings in Savannah are late. In Baton Rouge, they have the good sense not to have meetings after 7 o'clock, right? So I'm looking for a meeting and I'm trying to find different ones. There was one in Pooler at 8 o'clock called Language of the Heart. I didn't know where Pooler was, but thank God for Google Maps. So it takes me 45 minutes to find the YMCA in Pooler to go to this meeting, and that's where I met Miss Evelyn for the first time. And I kept driving 45 minutes every week just to go sit in a meeting to get to hear what she had to say. So if y'all are in recovery and you're looking for a meeting, find out where she goes, because we have one of the pillars of recovery in Savannah up on this platform today.
And we're sorry about the band. There was a mistake, Carol's mistake. We were supposed to have Metallica play, and I don't know why they got this other band. So we're so sorry about that. We're going to take a few questions, and then after that, we're going to go straight outside and do the rest of the program in the Telfair Square. So we'll take questions from all of you. And first, and if you want to have a question in general or for an individual, please just let us know. So I'll go by hands if anybody has a question. Bill? How are substance abuse issues and health issues addressed in the Jewish faith? I think it's very similar. I think we have a lot of the same issues everybody else does. The issue of admitting you have it out loud, the issue of what are the consequences from the community viewpoint. But we use religion in the very same way, understanding who you are under God, the responsibility you have to the body, the responsibility you have your family, the ideas of compromise. There's a very, very important tenet in Judaism. It is pretty much used for everything, and that is too much is too much. That minimal amount or a certain amount of most things is fine, but anything you have too much of, too much food, too much alcohol, too much, and a good example is too much giving. In Judaism, there's even a belief that you should not donate too much money because you may then make your family have issues with money. So the idea is you only even give, you only volunteer enough hours so that you're not taking yourself completely away from your family or from your responsibilities. So everything is meant to do in a limited capacity, and that is pretty much across the board. Don't go to services too much. Don't pray too much. There's edicts against praying too much, because if you pray too much, it means you're not going out and helping people. But if you're helping people too much, then you're not praying enough and you're not spending too much time with your family. But if you spend all your time with your family and you're not helping, that means you're not setting an example for your kids. Everything in moderation, no matter how good it is. And also, when it comes to addiction, it's the same thing. If a little bit is too much, then it's too much. Moderation for everyone is not the same. I can handle alcohol, not because I'm better, just because I'm lucky. You know, it does not bother me to have some drinks, and I'm not going to feel addicted or need to have another drink for a year or two. It doesn't matter to me. But in Judaism, we say it's not because I'm a better human being, it's the luck of the draw. And God made us human, means we're equal in God's eyes, but doesn't mean we're equal in our abilities. Some of us are better at math, some of us are better at science, some of us are better at this and that. Some of us have addiction issues because of the way our bodies are, and some don't. You have to kind of do the best with what you've got. So I think it's an excellent question, but I think it's very similar to Christianity, Islam. Obviously, there's subtle differences in our theology, but in terms of recovery, I think Judaism is right out there too, saying we have not done what we're supposed to do. We have certain holidays in which you're supposed to get drunk, which is fine. Obviously, don't drive, but for people who cannot handle alcohol, that's an issue. So where we do Kiddush now, which is our prayer for the wine, you have the option of wine or grape juice. I do with my kids. And since I have these issues in my family, as many of us do, or almost all of us, it's one of the things I have to teach my kids, that, you know, we celebrate this prayer for the wine, and the prayer for the wine is so important, and it's a basis of Judaism in many respects, but there are some issues with it, and we have to be careful. So that's a good question. Thanks for asking it. Do we have any questions for any of our wonderful panelists? They did such a good job, and they really were succinct in everything they said. So if we have no questions, then Carol, I'm going to give it back to you and say thank you for staying for our panel. And I'm going to add, when I was listening you speak, we all know who your father is. I thought for a second it was going to be like he's a great person in person, but behind the scenes he wasn't. But really, it shows that it can happen to anybody.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for hanging in there, even with the impromptu band music. And thank you for our panelists, and especially Rabbi Haas. We have decided not to proceed with the musical performance inside the church or the benediction, because we could not possibly match that band outside. So what we're going to ask you to do is retire out to Telfair Square. We have refreshments and fellowship and music in Telfair Square, and resource tables with all kinds of information about addiction and recovery, peer group support, 12-step groups. We are delighted that you came, and you'll hear more from us about our next major event. Thank you for being here.